Ladies and gentlemen, I'm George Thorman, and I'd like to welcome you to another program of local history. A couple of months ago, I did a program with Nipper Scott and Dr. Carey, who were both World War I flyers. And that program was so interesting, we decided that we'd do a program on each of them instead of trying to share a program. And today my guest is Norman B. Scott, betterly known as Nipper. Nipper, I think we shouldn't have any difficulty in filling in an hour of taking you back 60-some years to your experiences in France. And I do appreciate you coming out today. Now, I think what we'll do is just start right out. How old were you when you enlisted, and when did you enlist?
I was 18, and I enlisted in June of 1917.
And what made you pick the Air Force? Why did you pick the Air Force?
Quit? Well, the damn war was over.
No, but why did you go into the Air Force?
Oh, well, I was interested in flying, and I thought that would be a good thing to join, and there were 5 or 6 other fellows that were going to do the same thing. Ken McPherson and George Ponsford for 2 of them that I knew quite well, and Roy Dubber, another one. And we all went down to Toronto, and we were all accepted, and we all joined. And the big adventure started.
And where did you go for your basic training in?
Well, they had an aerodrome down near Belleville called Rathbun. And I took my first few flights there. And then as we got a little further along, we went to Camp Borden.
Well, tell me something about your initial training flights.
That was at this place down near Belleville.
Yeah. Well, that was the what is the name of that school? Now, we have here in your logbook, you took your solo on the 29th of August, 1917, and that's marked solo. And then your real solo flight was a few days later when you made a trip to Mohawk and Napanee. Mm-hmm. There are 2 solos marked here. Now, is that first one the accurate one?
That was just to cross the aerodrome and make a slow turn and come back, that's all.
Now, they tell me you didn't do that too well, or?
Well, I did it very damn well, but I did vertical banks on the corners, and I was side-slipping very badly, and I didn't know that, of course, and he gave me hell when I got down.
I did.
I made a beautiful landing, best landing I ever made. I think I put it down, you wouldn't feel it.
Yeah.
But I was patting myself on the back until he came over and started to chew me out.
Well, that's very dangerous to side-slip into a landing.
Well, I didn't know that I was side-slipping that badly. I was
Well, of course, up to that time, you'd only had about, what, 3 hours
about that, yeah.
of dual control. Well, then your big solo was on the 30th of August 1917, and that's when you were up for 45 minutes. Yeah. And you made a flight to Mohawk and Napanee. Now, you had some memories of that flight.
That was quite a thing to fly that far from the aerodrome and find the aerodromes down near Toronto and land on them and report and get filled up with gas again and go back again. It was, well, where was it from? From Belleville or?
Well, that was your initial, yeah, from Belleville.
Mm-hmm. Well, Belleville's not all that far from Toronto, but still it was quite a thing for a fellow who just done a solo and hadn't really very much experience. But I had to make a cross-country flight from Camp Borden to Toronto and back twice and land at different aerodromes.
Well, on the end of the week ending of September the 2nd, you've been in the air 190 minutes I've got here. That's of dual control, and you've been in the air 615 minutes on your own. So you've had really 13 hours of training. Well, then, where'd you go from that school, from the one at Belleville?
To Camp Borden.
And that was, what's that called, 78?
I don't remember any numbers or anything.
Now, what did you specialize on at Camp Borden?
What was what?
What did you specialize on at Camp Borden?
Just learning to fly in formation, for one thing, and learning to fire live ammunition at a towed target. And that was about it, I guess. And cross country, we flew to Toronto and back a couple of times.
Well, now, I notice in your logbook here that you got one landing, Pan-O. What does that mean?
What's it say?
Pan-O-J. One landing, Pan-O-J.
I can't understand.
Well, can you read your own book there? I'm not sure what page I'm at here. I'm just looking at a copy of this.
I don't know what
78.
those letters are all for down the
Well,
side.
you've got there, this is the aerodrome, you have one landing, Pan-O, and then the next time you're practicing landing and you have puffs. What are puffs?
I don't know. I've forgotten what it's about.
And then you have practice with bombs down here.
Yeah. They weren't really bombs, they were just bags of flour.
And you were practice dropping them, eh?
Yeah.
Then there's another practice called with G stripes. What was that? Do you remember?
I don't know.
You don't remember what that was?
I don't even know what Pan-O is.
Well, must have been. Then you went on, and then you had a day here of camera fighting.
Well, we were given an aerial camera that took photographs when you pressed the button, and you were supposed to train your gun. This camera was supposed to be a gun on the other fellow with whom we were fighting, and you took a photograph, and if you had a photograph of him sitting in the cockpit, that was a kill.
Yeah.
And if you didn't get him in the cockpit and you only got it halfway down the tail, that was just a hit. So the camera could tell whether you were aiming properly or not.
Well, you didn't stay there very long at that school at Camp Borden,
No.
and then you were dispatched overseas.
I was sent directly overseas.
But before that, you'd have a holiday, eh? I have a.
Well, I had a couple of weeks leave.
Hey, yeah, I have a picture here of you and that leave.
Some of the fellows that I was with, Ken McPherson and Roy, or at least Ponsford, didn't go overseas when I did. They went to Texas as instructors because it got cold at that time in Camp Borden. And the Americans had set up this aerodrome in Texas, and they invited all the Canadians to come down there and spend the winter training because it was warm, you see.
Yeah.
But I didn't get to Texas, but McPherson and Ponsford did. And Ponsford never did get overseas. He was an instructor right to the end. But McPherson wangled himself overseas, and he didn't last very damn long until he got shot right through the hip here, and he was in hospital for months.
Well, did Dubber train with you at the same airfield, Roy Dubber?
Oh, yes, at the beginning, in camp down at Belleville.
Yeah.
But he didn't last very long. He was shot down in France almost immediately.
Well, did he go over the same time you did?
Well, yes.
Now, we just got to go back a minute. You just graduated with your wings and so on from there, and we have this picture of you with your Collie dog.
Yeah,
And where's that taken at?
at Union, at my home.
Yeah.
But this fellow, Dubber, you see, when we landed in London, we didn't know. We thought we had a choice as to what planes were going to fly.
Yeah.
Luckily, I was put on Bristol fighters, very luckily, because they were a hell of a good machine, able to take care of themselves, could maneuver like a scout. But Dubber was put on DH-4s, which were heavy bombers. And with a bomb load on, they couldn't get above about 12 or 14,000 feet.
Yeah.
Well, that was a suicide height because they could get you from the ground and everything in the sky was above you.
Yeah.
The enemy, I mean.
Yeah.
And they got shot down like flies because they just couldn't get out of the way. They were heavy and loggy and full of bombs, and so he didn't last very damn long until he was shot down in flames. I didn't tell his mother that, but so I was very damn lucky to have been put on Bristol fighters. Now, it might have had something to do with our previous record, because the Bristol fighter was almost like a scout. And if you had a good record of maneuverability and I hadn't had any crashes, and like I was, I didn't have a crash, never did have a crash, ever. And so they put me on Bristols, and I was very damn lucky because if you were on Bristols, you likely would survive.
Yeah, it was the outstanding airplane of the 1918,
Well,
the last year.
for instance, Richthofen, who shot down 87 or something like that, British and French airplanes, got one Bristol only, one.
Yeah.
He got all kinds of RE-8s, that was his duck soup. They were bumbling, slow-moving planes that didn't get up very high, 1,500 feet maybe to spot for the artillery sort of thing, you know.
Yeah.
Flew low down and slow.
Well, we have another picture of you here. I think I want to show this other picture of you as a young man with. You remember that one? Was that taken in England or was that taken in
no,
Canada?
my brother took that.
Your brother took that, or your father, you mean?
No,
or your brother.
My brother, I think, was in the studio by that time.
Yeah, some people probably don't realize that you're the son of one of St. Thomas's most famous photographers. And the Scott photography business, and your brother ran it after your father.
He was there for a long time, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I forget when he started, 1847 or some crazy time.
Yeah, I think he worked with...
Hopkins.
Who?
Hopkins.
Well, he was with Hopkins off and on, but he probably did his apprenticeship with Linda.
He may have done, I don't
Yeah.
remember that.
Yeah. Well, before you, we'll just kind of go back here to, you sailed from Halifax to go overseas, and you were pretty fortunate there, weren't you?
Yeah, we missed the explosion by 3 days.
What day then did you sail? Were you 3 days early or 3?
Oh, I forget. 3 days before the explosion,
Yeah.
yes, we left. We were just out in the ocean a ways, and when we had word by
Telegraph? Or I mean, wireless?
whatever they used in those
Yeah.
days to talk to ships at sea.
Yeah.
And they told us about the explosion. Well, we had been sitting beside that ship in the basin, in the Bedford Basin, for nearly a week, but it didn't go off until we left.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to me you've been lucky all your life.
Yeah, I think so.
You got away from there. Well, then when you got to London and you were stationed for training with Bristol fighters. Now, where was the airdrome that you trained in?
I can't remember. It's in my logbook here, I guess. Someplace in Netherhaven,
Yeah.
I think.
Well, you went to a couple of schools there, didn't you?
Oh yes, I was in several places.
Your logbook doesn't say where you were,
No,
but
it doesn't.
but you were flying over Salisbury and Netherhatome is there.
Yeah, Salisbury and Andover and
Yeah. Well, what did they train you on the Bristol fighter? I know. What kind of drills were you doing there?
Well, the first day that I landed at this place where we were going to be flying Bristols, they took me up in an old VE-2B or some damn thing. It didn't have any ailerons, for God's sakes. you just, when you shoved the stick over, it bent the wing down. The end of the wing just bent down or bent up. That was pretty primitive, you know.
Yeah.
I flew that for a couple of times, just for an hour. Well, then they put us on Bristols, and the fellow took me around the aerodrome once. That's all. And he got out. He said, "It's yours." And I flew a Bristol from then on, and that was a hell of a lot different from anything I'd ever flown before because it was heavier and faster. And but I didn't have any trouble because I'd always been able to land all right. So then I flew, it'll be in here, I suppose. I flew Bristols for, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and finally was sent overseas.
Well, your first, you were sent overseas to,
I think it was in March.
yeah, that's the first date when you're there with, but you had a fair length of time in instruction in England, eh?
Yes, I think when I went to France, I had 84 hours or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Now, it's on the 3rd of March, 1918, is the first time you appear with number 11 Squadron.
Yes, that's right.
And during most of March, they kept you practicing landings and...
Yes, I didn't go right to the front the first week or two I was there. They let me fly up to the front so they could show me the landmarks like Adenfair Wood and things that you could recognize from the air and know where you were, and the canal in front of Cambrai and Pome and Amiens, the principals, Arras. God, there wasn't anything left of Arras. It was just red dust.
Yeah, no, I know that. All those towns in that area were just smashed flat, weren't they?
Lens was another one that was smashed flat. We didn't get up as far as Ypres. I never got that far north.
Well, it was smashed flat too.
I guess so.
Yeah. Now, we might say something about the Bristol. This is a picture of it here. This is perhaps one of the most famous fighters in the war, because in the First World War, the Germans would get ascendancy first. Like the British planes were the best in 1914, the Germans in 1915. Then the British had the Camels and so on in 1916. Then the Germans came back with better planes. And then the Bristol turned out to be really one of the best planes in the war. Yeah. And it was designed by a man called Frank Barnwell. And it had a different horsepower, but it had 250 horsepower Rolls-Royce Falcon engine. And the total weight of the whole plane was 2,800 pounds. That's not very heavy to what we have now. And it had a speed of, 102 to 125 miles an hour?
About 125.
Yeah. Well, what was the landing speed of that plane?
Oh, I don't know. We never looked at the landing speed. We just landed, that's all. But you could tell by the seat of your pants, I guess about 60 miles an hour probably.
Yeah. And what about the takeoff speed?
About the same, I guess.
About the same, eh? Now, one of the things, I wonder if we can have that picture back on there of the Bristol fighter. It was a two-seater plane.
Yeah.
And the pilot sat in the front seat, and the observer sat in the back seat, but he had his back to you.
Well, if he could, if you wished, and he had a machine gun, of course. It was on a swivel. He could swing it in any direction. All he had to be careful about was not to shoot off the tail.
I think you can see in this picture, you can make out the two cockpits. The pilot is right very close under that top wing, on the edge of that, and the observer sits behind him. And this was really an outstanding plane. Now, there's a thing in red on the side that's just the exhaust pipe. And you have some interesting things to say about the exhaust pipe.
The only thing was that it got so damn cold up there. Mind you, at 20,000 feet, the temperature drops 3 degrees, or at least 1 degree for every 300 feet.
Yeah.
Well, if you're at 20,000 feet, the temperature might be 60 degrees colder than it is on the ground, and that would be 20 below zero maybe.
Yeah.
In March or April, you know, it wasn't that way, that cold in the summer.
Well, what kind of clothes did you wear?
Well, we had what they called a Sitka suit. It was a fur-lined suit that came out from your ankles right to your shoulders. And then there was a flying coat like I gave to the museum for wear in the summertime when it wasn't so cold. Because this Sitka suit was so bulky that when I got one on, I was like a teddy bear. I could hardly climb into the cockpit, you know. But you had to be warm, otherwise you couldn't take it.
What kind of a helmet did you wear?
Well, it was a fur-lined helmet with a thing down over your eyebrows. Well, then you wore a chin mask, and it was a fur-lined. This is all moleskin, you know. It was fur-lined, and it came up under your nose. And I forget what you had on your cheeks. I guess this helmet that you had over here came down far enough that it covered your cheeks because they would freeze quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, people must remember these were all open cockpits, weren't they?
Then we used to smear whale oil on our hands and on our cheeks and on our nose, because your nose stuck out, you know, and it could get frozen very easily. But it was evil smelling stuff, and we didn't like to put it on, but you pretty well had to, otherwise you're going to come home with frost marks all over your face.
Well, now, what about shoes?
Oh, well, we had fur-lined shoe right up to here. Big heavy shoes with sheepskin, with the fur inside.
Yeah.
They were warm, all right, no question.
And what about gloves?
Well, usually you started off with a pair of silk gloves, and then you put on a pair of woolen gloves, and then you put on a big pair of fur-lined gauntlets on top of that. Mm-hmm. You didn't have to have any maneuverability with your fingers particularly. All you do was hang onto a joystick, and you fired that by your thumb on a trigger on the joystick.
The joystick, that's where the trigger for the gun was.
Joystick was between your legs, and it stood about that high. And with that, you controlled the airplane. Mm-hmm. And then you also controlled both guns. There were 2 triggers on this thing, and the one up on the top wing, and the one firing straight through the propeller. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we can have that airplane back on again. And now on the top wing, there was a Lewis gun mounted.
Not every plane had it, but I had one on there, but it wasn't a hell of a lot of use.
No.
Mind you, it fired, it was synchronized with the Vickers gun in the, when I say synchronized, the bullets came together at 200 yards.
I see.
It's supposed to.
Yeah. Now the Vickers was on top of the engine.
Right between the cylinders, yeah. Right, flying.
And that was a Vickers machine gun.
Yeah.
And it was synchronized by an Italian mechanism called the Constantinesco.
Constantinesco gear, yeah.
Yeah, and it synchronized so you wouldn't shoot.
It was amazing that the synchronization could be so exact that a propeller flying at a speed where you couldn't even see it didn't get hit.
Yeah.
And the gun fired a little slower, no question about that. Yeah. But it fired pretty fast just the same.
Yeah. In other words, that bullet had to fire when the propeller was out this way and not when it was in a vertical position.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did anyone ever have the things go wrong? The propeller get shot off?
I have seen a propeller that had been shot through, but very damn seldom.
Yeah.
Mind you, it didn't shatter it all to hell. It just made a hole through it.
It did, eh? Yeah. Now the observer, the man behind you, who's got his back to you and has that Lewis gun on it of course is facing towards the tail. Now the theory was in this fighting with the Bristol that to have a 2-seater fighter plane, one was that the man in the back's going to do most of the shooting, but that didn't work out that way, did it?
No. However, when there was a flight of, say, 8 Bristols, all flying in formation with 8 guns firing out the back, it was a pretty formidable thing to attack
Yeah.
because there were an awful lot of bullets out there.
Yeah. Yeah, the theory was always in that First World War flight to get on the tail of your opponent. Eh?
Yeah, that's right.
And so that most of the planes that were shot down by the Bristol were shot down from the front gun.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. But
I think my observer got 1. I got 3.
yeah. But his main job was to really to stop anybody getting on your tail. Eh?
Yes, that's right.
Well, they tell me that observers had a pretty high casualty rate.
Well, I don't know that they had any more casualties than the pilots. After all, you were both sitting right together, and I had about 6 bullets take a chunk right out of my seat right there,
Right beside you.
2 inches from my ass.
But did the man in the back seat, the observer, did he have to stand up to?
He had to stand up to use the gun, yes.
Yeah. Now that
He
brings me
didn't
to-
sit down very much of the time either.
No.
He was standing up looking around.
Yeah. And he had to stand up to fire. It was on a ring mounting, and he
Yeah,
could
that's
swing. Some of those Bristols had 2 Lewis guns at the
I
back.
know, but that was silly because the guy wasn't strong enough to swing them against the wind.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. There'd be quite a bit of air resistance
Oh,
up
yeah,
there.
sure.
Yeah. But he would suffer from the cold more than you would if he's standing up, eh?
We never tried. I had an observer that was about 6'2", but he damn near stopped the airplane when he stood up.
I mean, with the wind resistance, yeah. But I suppose one reason they had a lot of casualties was because they were standing up, weren't they? More of their body was
Well,
exposed.
nearly all the attacks came from the rear, and of course he was behind the pilot, and he was the first one to get it. You see, I suppose that might have been. Although my observers never got hit or wounded or had any trouble.
You never lost an observer.
No.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to go back. I want to ask you some questions about your log here when you're in France. Now, you started out on the 3rd of March, and then on the 30th of March, you're flying over Albert and Bapaume, and you got a lump of Archie through the front petrol tank.
Yeah, well,
And you landed at Bellevue. Now, Archie was the nickname for artillery shell.
anti-aircraft guns.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, this thing made a hole about that long and that wide, right in the petrol tank that was behind the engine, and it held about 40 gallons, I guess. And it was the danger was that this hole was up about here, and the red hot exhaust pipe was about there, and every time the plane did a little dipsy doodle, gasoline slopped out on this red hot exhaust pipe. So I had to fly home like this to keep it from catching fire, because we were up 8,000 or 10,000 feet. We'd have been dead ducks if it had caught fire, you know. 'Cause we
Oh,
had
well, I know,
we
yeah.
had no parachutes.
Well, how many of the planes, a lot of the planes seem to have the gas tank right between the pilot and the engine.
Well, some of them, well, yes, we had one there, but I was sitting on 40 gallons right under my seat.
You were- Yeah. Well, no, that was a fairly frequent cause of the plane crashing, eh?
Oh, yes, if a plane caught fire, it was just curtains, that's all. There was nothing to it. If you're up 3 miles high, you were dead ducks, that's all.
But anyway, this piece of shrapnel goes through your tank, so you fly home this way to stop the gas leaking out in the hot exhaust pipe.
Well,
Now, did you land at, you said here that you landed at Bellevue. That wasn't your...
well, that was an old disused aerodrome, and I landed there and found a piece of hose pipe, and I siphoned out 20 gallons out of this tank, so it was away down below the hole, and then flew home in more or less safety We got a mouthful of gasoline starting this damn siphon, I remember that.
But talking about that red-hot exhaust pipe that went down on beside the cockpit, when you were cold, you used that exhaust pipe for warming your hands.
Yes, we used to burn the palms out of our gloves doing that, but of course they were free. When we got back, we got a new pair.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. That was a long time ago.
Yeah. Now, that was your... Now, then we have another one here. You landed at Gournay near Rouen. This was in about the 2nd of May. Well, I don't know whether it's an emergency landing or not. Well, yeah, it must have been a forced landing. You were going Cambrai, Douai, and Saint Quentin, and you landed at Gournay near Rodin. And then the next day...
last name? R-O...
Gournay.
Yeah, but what was the last name?
Rouen. R-O-U-E-N.
Oh, yeah, well, that's the way down south of where we were stationed.
Yeah, now why did you have to land down there?
I don't know. Something must have happened. There must have had some kind of a malfunction.
Yeah, so you landed there and get it fixed and then fly back the next day, eh? Now, here's another one on the, I don't know, this is the 28th of, can't realize what month that is. You've got down in your logbook, dives on 10 Huns, claimed one as indecisive. Was that the first plane you fired at?
No, I got one very early on, and I think it was in March, maybe? I'm not sure. The first one I got was a kind of a fluke. We had a dawn show every day.
Yeah.
We got up in the air before dark, before it got light, and flew to the front and patrolled back and forth to see what troop movements there were on the German side, in or out of the line.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, we wouldn't see them going in rather, but we'd see them going out, see, because they'd wait till the guys got in, then they'd start back and going through these communication trenches, and we'd see 1,000 men walking through these trenches going to the rear. And we'd report that to the Army, because they wanted to know that they had somebody different in front of them.
Yeah.
And they'd send a raiding party over and capture one of these guys and find out whether he was a hard fighting Prussian or whether he was a sort of a don't give a goddamn.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I was flying along on one of these dawn flights, practically in the dark, when I saw right under me, not from here to the wall over there, an airplane just passed under me like that. It was nearly a mid-air collision. And as he went by, I could see a black cross on his wing. So I just pulled up 50 feet and turned my nose down and shot him down. And it wasn't a victory, it was a bloody, cold-blooded murder. But after all, it was a German, and he had a good chance. He was sitting right there with a gun pointing right at us, but his observer was apparently asleep, because he didn't see us. See?
Yeah. So
we were right over.
you just passed each other like they could have shot you from underneath.
Oh, yes. All he had to do was just point his gun at us and rip us through the belly. But luckily, he didn't see us. I saw him first.
Well, did you do quite a bit of reconnaissance flight, that is sending
yes.
information?
Yeah, we did a lot of that. We flew to Cambrai and back quite a long way behind the lines quite often, seeing what was going on there, you know. Now, we could tell if we flew through Denain or Douai or some of the places like that that were within 20 miles of the line, very often there'd be maybe 10 trains in the railway station, all puffing smoke and freight cars, and obviously they were bringing up supplies, munitions, and shells and stuff. There's going to be a push in that area. Well, we'd tell the infantry that when we got back, and they were very happy to know that, because then they would strengthen the troops that they had opposite this place, you know. That was one of the things we did.
Now, I have an entry here on, this is in June 1918. You say you shot down a Hun Albatross, a two-seater in flames at 6,000 feet. And this was when you were alone on a dawn patrol.
Oh, that's the first one, yeah.
Yeah. And then you've got a note here, you're out in patrol again, I think the next day, and you did a reconnaissance and you received some artillery fire. You say it was very hot, and then you call it suicide sky. What was the suicide sky?
A suicide sky is one where the clouds are at about 20,000 feet and white. So they just stood out against it, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Now, sometimes, if the sky was black clouds, sometimes there are clouds that are very dark.
Yeah.
You didn't stand out so clearly against them, you know.
Yeah, but against white clouds, just
Machine-
the way we
machine
count
was
hawks
dark.
in the fall.
The machine was painted dark green. I don't know why they didn't paint the underside white, but they didn't.
Yeah. Now here again on the, I think it's the 30th of June, you've got, you flew to Bray and a petrol pipe burst. You came down from 16,000 feet with,
No engine, I suppose.
that's right, with no engine, dead engine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now would
Well,
you get back to your home airport that day?
I doubt very much. If I was at Bray, that's too far away.
Yeah.
You see, if you have a petrol pipe burst and there's gasoline flowing all over the damn floor, and your engine is on with a red hot exhaust pipe going by, you can catch fire very damn easily.
Yeah.
So,
Especially if you got a gas tank underneath you.
so I just shut off the engine and came down dead stick.
Yeah.
That's kind of difficult too, because you got to find a place to land and make sure that it's big enough and not full of ditches and stuff. And then you've only got one chance because you shut the engine off and you can't start it again. At least you can't do it from the cockpit.
Well, how many feet would you need to make a landing?
Oh,
Like on an emergency
I
like
would
that?
think, I would think a good 200 yards anyway.
200 yards.
You first of all, you've got to get down to 10 feet above the ground, say, so you can see what kind of ground you're going to land on. And then you've got to shut off the engine and let the airplane just slow down of its own accord. You've got no brakes or anything.
No, that's right. Yeah.
So
you just have to-
you have to judge it very damn carefully to make sure that you're going to slow
Yeah,
down in time that you won't go over into a wooded ravine or something at the
Yeah.
other end.
Well, you were coming close there. 2 days later, that was the 30th of June, you landed with a dead engine, and then 2 days later, your engine caught fire at 6,000 feet. And you
Yes.
say, I dived vertically.
I remember that. I dived and I put it out. I blew it out.
But when that engine's catching fire and you're diving like that, isn't that flame coming right back at you?
Yeah, but it didn't get that big.
I
It
see.
didn't explode a gas tank, in other words.
Yeah.
If it had, of course, that would have been the end.
Yeah.
But
This is a fired
I
start at the
remember
front of the engine.
I remember I dived at about 200 miles an hour and just blew the damn flame right out.
Yeah. Well, that was 2 days apart. You weren't. You were having some pretty close calls there. Now, then on the 15th of July, your water pump broke and you landed at Remesnil.
Romano, they call it.
Yeah.
Well, I had to come down because I would have ruined the engine if I hadn't shut it off.
Yeah.
So if you don't have any water circulating through the engine while you're,
Yeah.
it'd just be seconds before it would seize up.
Well, then on the 20th, that's when you shot up a Hun two-seater at 10,000 feet over Cambrai, and then you said that's indecisive.
Oh yeah, I couldn't prove that. I don't know whether I hit him or not. Didn't hit me anyway.
No. But what kind of proof did you have to have before they'd credit you with the plane shot down?
Well, usually there were several people flying together with you. Sometimes you were alone, but not too often. But the time I got that first one was right over the lines, and 10,000 men saw it come down.
Yeah.
They all reported it, infantry in the trenches. Well, then another time I shot one down at a dogfight, and several of my fellows that were flying with me saw it and confirmed what I said. And sometimes, of course, if you're all alone 10 miles over the lines, there's no confirmation at all. You just have to tell them the story, and if they believe it, okay. Of course, you've got the observer there. He could confirm it too, you know.
But this is one thing I suppose that we should remember. Most of the fighting in 1918 was done well over the German lines, wasn't
Yes,
it?
most of it, yeah. Well, at that time, we were flying 8 and 10, 12 miles over their lines every day. But I think some of the guys in the squadron came back with some pretty wild tales about what they shot down, you know. But who's to say no, you know?
No. Well, the same thing happened in the Second World War. Like, you remember in 1940, in August and September, they were shooting down 189 planes a day. And then after the war, when the records are examined on the German side and the English side, the number of planes shot down are quite a bit fewer than that.
Yes. Well, everybody's optimistic.
Yeah. Now, then a few days later, you have a burst of bullets through the rear petrol tank, controls and main spar. Now, nothing...
That's the one that went through right there.
Right a couple inches from your leg, eh? That was a man firing from above you then, eh?
No, he was firing from down below. He was way off. I thought he was a quarter of a mile away. And he sat up on his tail. I could see him now. And when he put this burst right there, he was a damn good shot.
And that's again, that tank didn't catch fire then.
No,
you wouldn't be here.
Of course, I might have put my hand over a hole that small and beat it out, you know.
I see.
Right there where I could do it.
But
it would have been up in the top tank where I couldn't reach it, I think.
Yeah.
It's too bad.
Now, on the 16th of July, in a bombing escort, you were in 2 fights, and you shot down 1 Hun. And then I guess you're somebody who was flying with you got another one that day.
We used to have to escort the bombers.
Yeah.
Well, they would maybe be going 12, 15 miles over the line to bomb an aerodrome or maybe a tank farm or something. And if there were 10 of them, there'd be about maybe 10 of us. And we'd be flying in 2 formations of 5 there and 5 up here at maybe 1,000 feet above the bombers. So we'd be behind them to ward off anybody that was going to attack them from the rear. Well, then, mind you, the bombers all had machine guns in their rear cockpits. They weren't helpless either. They had front guns too, but a bomber with heavy load on wasn't very maneuverable, and they were pretty sitting ducks, you know.
Yeah. Well, then we come to August, and I've got a 5 Fokkers. You dived on them, and but you were shot up yourself that day. That was the 22nd of August. Pardon?
They were called Fokkers.
Yeah.
Did you ever hear the story about the guy that was emceeing a program like that, and the fellow said, I was attacked by 3 Fokkers over Berlin. And he said, pardon me, perhaps I should explain that Fokker was the name of a famous German fighter plane. Yeah, he said, but these Fokkers were flying Messerschmitts.
Now, you did a lot of bombing escorts in that month of August, 1918.
We were duck soup for that because we were
Yeah. Then you've got on the 6th of September.
With the Camels and other fighter planes escorting bombers, they couldn't go that far.
No.
They would run out of gas before they got 10 miles over and 10 miles back, you know.
Well, you could go for 3 hours about, eh?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I noticed here on the 6th of September, you were looking for 2 missing machines lost in a scrap this morning. Your squadron must have lost a couple of planes that morning.
I guess so.
And then, now on the 6th...
You've photographed this whole logbook, have you?
Yeah, the 16th of September, you led the top and attacked the 30 planes. You got 2, Thomas and Barnes. Are those the pilots that got them?
No, I think we lost them.
You lost them. Lost 2 planes. You were fighting against I think that's 30 enemy aircraft.
They never attacked us unless they had about 3-to-1 odds, you know.
Yeah. Now on the
We've had a lot
20,
of things marked there. I must have had.
well, the 29th of September, you were flying an OP escort or a DP escort, which is it? And you got down here, hell of a fight, got
OP
5 Huns and lost
OP
one of ours.
means defensive patrol.
Oh yeah, defensive
We were
patrol.
out looking for trouble.
Yeah. Well, you ran into and you had a big fight, and your squadron got 5 Huns that day, but you lost one yourself.
Yeah, I didn't get any that day.
No.
And that's the other one up there.
Well, this one here is on
Oh.
the 4th of October, and again you ran into 40 enemy aircraft, and you got Thomas and Philippe collided, and were all killed. Now, this and that dogfight, where 2 of the pilots crashed, did they? That is, they banged into each other?
No, we didn't have any. Well, we had airplanes crash into each other, but not in fights.
No. Well, I would skip that then. That's maybe not too clear. And then I got one more here on the 14th of October. You met 10 Germans head on, and the flying wires were shot off by artillery fire.
What was?
Your flying wires, like some of the struts,
Oh,
I
yeah,
guess.
yeah.
And then
There
you,
were the wires between, in the out on the wing, you know.
Now,
Well,
on
they
the-
mattered, of course, but they didn't matter as much as something that went to the tail.
well, then you had to make a forced landing on the 24th of October. No details about that. On the 30th of October 1918, you had your last flight in France. You went away for leave to England.
Well, I would.
And you'd been there you'd flown 277 hours in France.
Yeah. I
That
had
was,
more time over the lines than anybody who had ever been in the squadron. I
well,
was
you
there
were,
7.5 months, which was a lot longer than
you were pretty lucky to
Oh, yeah, I'll say.
come back with having all that time
I
in
made
there.
99 trips over enemy territory, I found out, if you count them in the
99.
logbook.
Yeah.
99.
Well, now, you went back to England on leave, and when you were there, the war ended, and you didn't go back to France anymore.
No, I guess not. I think somebody packed up my
You went to Whitney. You were at Whitney for a
near
while.
Oxford.
Yeah.
That was a queer place. There were a bunch of fellows down there. Must have been 1,000 officers and maybe a couple thousand men, you know.
Yeah.
They had some airplanes, but they didn't do much flying. And I hadn't been there a week until some second-in-command guy grabbed me off and made me head of a stock-taking board. That meant counting everything on that bloody station, including the cups and saucers, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I had an assistant, a fellow who could type, and we'd go around all day counting stuff. And this was stuff that had been there for 4.5 years, and of course a lot of it was destroyed and had been replaced, and we couldn't track it all down, but we counted what that was there and made our reports every night. Well, then we just got through, and I handed in all this stuff. It took us about 3 or 4 weeks, you know. We had reams and reams of paper. I handed it all in to the commanding officer, and he said, well, Scott, he said, there isn't anybody on the station that knows the station as well as you do. He said, you're the quartermaster now. Well, quartermaster, that's a hell of a job, you know, look after all this stuff, and the men, too. So I was quartermaster. We had a good quartermaster sergeant, thank goodness. Then he got sick with the flu, and I was running the place all by myself practically. We had a couple of girls, but they didn't know from nothing. So I was quartermaster there for until the end of the war, almost.
Yeah.
And it was a heck of a job because we had 1,000 men and 700 officers and 300 women.
Yeah.
All these people had to be fed.
Yeah.
and they had to have beds to sleep in, and we had people coming and going all the time. And some of these fellows from France would louse up a whole bunch of blankets, and we'd have to send them all to a laundry to get them cleaned up.
Yeah, listen, tell me about the louse up the blankets.
I was 19, see,
Yeah,
and I was running this damn station practically.
Yeah.
Well, finally they said they had a boat for us. That we were going to go home, and they took me off the job and put some older fellow on it. But I didn't get home for about 2 or 3 months after that. There were dock strikes in Liverpool, and all kinds of things happened. And finally, I think it was in May that we finally got on a boat for Canada. And the war had been over for 6 months, you know.
Yeah.
However, we were well fed and well paid, and we didn't care much.
Well, and that was so you got back to Canada, and how old were you then?
Well, I guess I must have been 20 when I got back to Canada. Yes, I would be, because I was 19 when I was in France in December. Well, then there was January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, and into the next year before I got home.
So when you got back here in May, your family would be glad to see you, of course, but you sort of loafed around that summer.
I didn't do anything. I thought I needed a holiday, and I didn't need a holiday at all. I went to Port Stanley and swam out to the lighthouse every morning. Rain or shine, waves this high, you know. I got in awful good shape that summer, but I really didn't need to do that, so I went back to the bank about October, I guess. So I've been a sort of a
Well, at the
guy ever since.
At the age of 20, you've kind of lived a really very, very full life.
I've had some experiences.
You have, and missed death a large number of times. Just one little charming story I got to tell. Your brother was a photographer in St. Thomas, and when you were overseas, I wonder if we can pick this one up. This young lady came into your brother's photography shop, and your picture was up on the wall, eh?
Yeah.
So what happened?
She, God, I've forgotten her name now, but she came from Timmins, I think. She was a French Canadian, and she was going to Alma College. We had a hot correspondence for about 6 months, though.
And then
I never met her after we got back.
You never ever met her?
No, I never met her face to face, because she'd gone back to Timmins by the time I got home, and she wasn't at Alma College anymore. And
No.
it's a good thing I didn't meet her. I might have married her, and I would hate to think that I didn't have my present wife.
Well, no. Well, I think there was a lot of that writing back and forth. A lot of people corresponded to soldiers.
Terrific correspondence. They called me the war correspondent, because every day when the mail came in, I got 20 letters, and some fellow didn't get any.
Yeah.
That was because I wrote to everybody I knew.
Listen, now I'm not going to trace your career from the time you came back and went in the bank. You ended up as a bank manager, of course, spent the rest of your life banking until you retired. But did you ever fly again?
No, I never got a chance.
Did you ever want to fly? Did you?
Oh, yes, I would love to have gone up. I've passed the airfield at Aylmer many times, and what I really wanted to do was to get up on a glider. But, of course, I never had a chance.
Yeah. Because a lot of people who had the same kind of career as you did had a very great deal of difficulty in settling down to civilian life. And, you know, they went around barnstorming and trying to get some kind of a career with involved the airplane. But you never had any of those temptations.
Well, I was tempted, sure, but then I didn't have an opportunity to go out to Aylmer and rent an airplane to fly. It would cost you a couple of $100, and I didn't feel that I had that kind of money to spend. And I didn't know anybody out there who offered to take me up.
Well, have you been on commercial flights, though, eh?
A fellow, I've been on commercial flights, sure. A fellow that worked with Wilson Somerville, Wilson. He had an airplane, and he was flying it all the time. He said, "Nipper, I'm going to take you up sometime." And he never did. Yeah. I would like to have gone up with him, because he could have taken me over my home and showed me what our farm looked like, and taken me down to Port Stanley and that sort of thing. But son of a gun never came through. He hasn't offered lately. Maybe he isn't flying anymore, I don't know. That was 10 or 15 years ago that he...
Well, you've had an amazing, amazing life, and really must have been terribly interesting to.
Well, the only thing is,
I think we have to wind this up. We've just about gone
the
over.
only thing about my flying career in France was that I was extraordinarily lucky.
Yeah, yeah,
Extraordinarily lucky.
yeah. I think you almost have to be lucky to avoid anything. Nipper, thank you very much for coming and talking to us this afternoon, and thank you for watching. Good afternoon.